Want to build a home lab and don't have the money to spend on new equipment? How about just reusing some of your older gear that is just sitting around collecting dust? In this tutorial, I'm going to install the Proxmox Virtual Environment to my old MacBook Pro laptop. And then I'm going to install an Ubuntu Virtual Machine to host my local Snapdrop server. So here's my 2016 laptop that really isn't getting much use. It has 8 CPUs, 16 gigs of RAM, and a 500 gig NVMe SSD. So it's not great, but good enough for this attempt at a home lab. The only thing I needed to add is this USB-C dongle because there is no Ethernet built in. And as I found out, I also need to have an external keyboard and mouse for the setup because the Proxmox install software doesn't have the proper drivers for the MacBook keyboard. Another thing to note is that you want to make sure you back up any data from the MacBook that you want to keep, as installing the Proxmox software will overwrite any data on that laptop drive. First thing we need to do is to download the Proxmox software from their website at proxmox.com. And as you can see, they have a server for creating enterprise virtualization to manage VMs and containers. This is what we are going to do today. They also have a server for an enterprise backup solution and a mail gateway. I'm going to click the Proxmox Virtual Environment section. And then here they talk more about this virtual environment server. But let's click into the Downloads tab and then click to download the VE 8.0 ISO installer. It's only a 1.1 gig file, so it should be pretty quick. Now that we have the ISO, the next thing we need to do is to make it bootable. One easy way is to use Ventoy, which will accept ISOs and allow them to be selected and booted from. And if you're not familiar with Ventoy, you can check out this video here. Another solution is to use the Balena Etcher. You can look at the description below for links to those programs. Now we're ready to configure the MacBook laptop to run the Proxmox software. Make sure you connect the USB-C dongle with the Ethernet adapter and also an external keyboard and mouse. I have my Ventoy drive with the Proxmox ISO connected, so I will hit the power button and then hold down the Alt Option key. I get to choose to boot between EFI on the drive or the USB. And I'm going to choose the USB drive. And then I get my Ventoy boot menu. I'm going to use my arrows to go all the way down to Proxmox version 8.02 and then hit enter. Here I see the Proxmox welcome screen to the virtual environment. I can install using the graphical view or console view or the advanced options, which has more booting options, a secure boot, and a memory tester. I'm going to select the first option of graphical. And after a few seconds of the blank screen taken over, we see the end user license. Here is where you need to use your mouse to scroll down the window to read the tiny print, or just tab over to the I agree button. Next, you get to choose the target hard disk to install the software to. And looking at the selector, we have the choice of the internal hard drive or the USB thumb drive. Obviously, I'm going to choose the internal hard drive. And then you can hit the options button to choose the type of file system you want to use. I'm going to leave the default of ext4 and then the default drive size settings. Next, you get to choose the location and time zone. In the country, I'm going to type Canada. For the time zone, I'm going to select America, Toronto. And then I'm going to leave the keyboard as US English. Next, you get to set a root password for the system. Definitely follow the guidelines to set a strong password, which in my opinion should have more than 12 characters and contains letters, numbers, and symbols. And they also want a valid email so that the server can send important alert notifications. Next is setting the network configurations. The first item is the management interface, and my hardware sees a Ethernet interface and a wireless interface. I will choose the wired Ethernet interface. It wants a host name, so I'm gonna name it proxmox.local. For the IP address of the machine, I'm gonna set it to 192.168.1.10. And then my gateway is 192.168.1.1. And my DNS is also 192.168.1.1. Now we get a summary page that we should review to make sure everything is correct. You may also notice a checkbox on the bottom that says automatically reboot after successful install. And I'm going to go ahead and leave it checked. Alright, now that the install of Proxmox is successful and the machine has rebooted, let's take a look at the server's management tool via a web browser by going to https://192.168.1.19 and then :8006, as that's the special port for Proxmox. And I'm first greeted by the login window. So I will type in the user of root and then the password that I had set prior. I will leave the realm as the Linux PAM or pluggable authentication modules, as that was the default and I did not change it yet. And then lastly, the language you want the management tool to be displayed in. And I'm going to leave it in English. Once I'm authenticated, I get a warning that I'm not subscribed to their service. I'm going to click OK for now, but eventually I may want to pay for one of these subscriptions. And as of the filming of this episode, I am running Proxmox VE version 8.0.3. Going to the right, up here at the top, we have a search box that would allow one to look for specific VMs or containers or other objects if you know the name. Then there is the documentation button where you can access the full Proxmox VE admin guide or specific chapters or specific command line tools for topics that you are interested in. Then there are the two buttons for the creation wizards of virtual machines or containers. And lastly, you will see the names of the user that is logged in via the web interface. If you click on the box here, you can access settings where you can customize your user experience. Now that we have the Proxmox server running, we can unplug the keyboard and mouse as we don't need those anymore. We can remote into the server from another machine to make things easier. And then I can go ahead and close the lid of the MacBook Pro and actually put it away so that the inside doesn't collect dust and it takes up less space. So one thing I have to do, because I am running this on the MacBook Pro, is that I need to disable the feature that powers down the computer when the lid is closed. So I'm going to go ahead and SSH into the server, or I can access it via the shell tool on the menu of Proxmox. So I'm going to go ahead and use the web interface to select shell. And then once I'm in, I'm going to go ahead and vi/etsy/systemd/logind.conf. And I'm going to remove the comment from the 3 lines that start with handle lid switch. And then change the word suspend to ignore for handle lid switch. And then go ahead and save the file. And then back in the command line, I'm going to do system control restart systemd-logind. So now that's done, we can go ahead and close the lid of the laptop and put it away somewhere out of the way. And the one thing to make sure is that it's somewhere that's near the Ethernet cable so it can be connected to your local switch or router. I'm now going to demo the creation of a virtual machine in Proxmox. And in this VM, I will load the Ubuntu OS and then the Snapdrop code to run a local server. So the first thing I do is to download the Ubuntu Server ISO from ubuntu.com. I'm going to be clicking through the download links here, and we see that the LTS version as of this video is 22.04.3. And then I'm going to go ahead and click on copy the link for the download. And back in Proxmox in the shell, I'm going to cd into /var/lib/vz/template/iso. This is where Proxmox will look for VM ISOs for you to choose from. So I'm going to go ahead and type in wget and then paste the link. And this will go ahead and download that ISO to this location. Another way I could have done this with a GUI and without a command line is if I went ahead and clicked on local disk, then on ISO images, and then click on the download from URL. From here, I'm going to paste that copied link into the URL box here, and then click on the query URL. This is going to go ahead and fill in the file name for you. And then when you're ready, you can click download. Another way you can do this without doing command line with just the GUI is to click on local disk and then ISO images, and then click upload. From here, select the file and then browse to where you downloaded the ISO. And you can also select the hashing algorithm to verify the hash. And then when you're ready, click upload. All right, now we're ready to click create VM. We get a creation wizard, and the first tab we see is the general tab. Here we can choose the nodes. I only have Proxmox, so we'll leave that alone. For the VM ID, I am going to enter 501, and this could be any number you want to use. I'm going to basically use the 500 series for my VMs because VM starts with a V, which is Roman numeral for 5. For resource pool, I will also leave that alone. All right, and for the name, I'm going to use Snapdrop VM. And then I'm going to click next to advance to the OS tab. Here under ISO, I'm going to go ahead and select the Ubuntu server we just downloaded. And then the guest OS type should be Linux. And then the guest version of the kernel should be 6.x down to 2.6. Next to the system tab. Basically, I'm going to leave all these as default. The graphic card, I'm going to leave as the default. The SCSI controller, I'm going to leave as the default. For the machine, you have a choice between the i440FX and the Q35 chipset. I will leave the default of i440FX. For the firmware BIOS, you have a choice between the CBIOS or the OVMF, which is the UEFI. I'm going to leave the default of CBIOS. Clicking next, we get to the storage tab. For the bus device type, I am going to select SCSI, which is the fastest. And then for the disk size, I am going to put in 32 gigs. And then hit next to the CPU tab. For the sockets, I'm going to leave it as 1. And then for cores, I'm going to up it from 1 to 2 cores. For the CPU type, I am going to select the x86-64-V2-AES. And then click next to the memory tab. I am going to increase my memory to 4096 or 4 gigs of memory. And then I'm going to check the advanced checkbox down here if it has not been already checked. And I'm going to select this ballooning device, which allows for the host to use the memory if the VM is actually not using it or not allocated. Next to the network tab, I am going to basically leave everything as is. And lastly, to the confirmation tab, I'm going to look over everything to make sure it's all fine. And then hit finish. And then you can see that there is a new VM created here on the side panel. The number is 501, which is what we gave it. And then the name is Snapdrop VM. And the icon you notice is gray in color, which means the machine is not powered on. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the summary to take a look. And it says 2 CPUs, 4 gigs of memory, 32 gigs of disk space. Basically all the stuff we selected, so that's all good. So let's go ahead and click start. And once you've started it up and you want to actually watch the startup sequence, you can click on the console here. And as we're looking at the things flip by, the first question we get is from Grub asking us whether we want to boot or install to disk, which is what we want. So go ahead and select that. Then we get to the setup prompts. I'm going to go ahead and choose English as that's the language that works best for me. I will then choose to continue without updating as I'm going to go ahead and update later. And next you get to choose the keyboard and layout. I will leave it as the default US keyboard. You can obviously choose what works for you and then click done. Next you get to choose the type of install. I'm going to leave it as the default. And then for the network connection, I see that the HCP is already running on the network and it has assigned this VM an IP. So I will go ahead and take that. Next I'm asked for a proxy address. I don't have one, so I'm going to click done to continue. And then it asks for a Ubuntu mirror. And once again, I am going to take the default. And next for the disk, I am going to leave the default of using the entire disk as an LVM volume. And next, about using LUX, I am going to forego that for now. Then in the storage configuration, I am going to accept the default of using all 32 gigs for the various partitions needed. And you will be asked to confirm that doing this will result in the loss of data as the disk will be formatted. And since this is a brand new VM, which gives us new disks, that should be fine. And then next, we'll be asked to set up a profile where you set up the machine name, a username, and a password. So I'm going to go ahead and just call this machine Snapdrop VM. I'm going to create a user of Blue Monkey Forensics. My password of password123456. Next, we'll be asked if you want to upgrade to Ubuntu Pro. I'm going to go ahead and skip this for now. And then you'll be asked if you want to install the OpenSSH server. This I do want, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the spacebar to select the install. And then it will ask to import the SSH identity. I don't have my keys ready at this point, so let's do this later. And finally, you will be asked to select the server snaps. I'm going to select Docker by arrowing down and then hitting the spacebar when Docker is highlighted. And then use the tab key to get to the done and then enter. And off it goes to configure the VM. This would take about a minute or so to do. And then when it's done, you will see the orange bar on top that says the install is complete. So I'm going to go ahead and select Reboot Now.
A few moments later.
Now that the VM has booted, I'm going to go ahead and log back in. I am going to switch to the No VNC tool to bring the console window into its own window because the fonts are too small, otherwise it's hard for me to read and definitely hard for this video. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to do is to grab the Snapdrop code folder from GitHub. So I'm going to do git clone https://github.com/robinlinus/snapdrop.git. This should be pretty quick, and when it's done, I should have a new folder named Snapdrop. I'm going to cd into the Snapdrop folder and do an ls, and I see that there are a few folders and then a docker-compose.yaml file. I'm going to edit this configuration file with vi, and what I want to do here is add the Nginx proxy manager container and then change the ports for the server to 8082 for the unencrypted HTTP requests and then 4432 for the HTTPS connection. One thing to note here is that make sure you have the indentions right, otherwise Docker will not run and give you errors. So first I'm going to do is add a line that says app : and then I'm going to add the image : of jc21/nginx-proxy-manager : and then container _name : nginx-proxy-manager, and then ports : -81:81. And then I'm going to go down to the section where Nginx is already there. And I'm going to change 8080 to 8082 and then 443 to 4432 just to be different. Now I'm going to do one more little tweak for Snapdrop to work for all devices within the same network, because Snapdrop was built for remote servers, not hosting on a local network. So this change is necessary to make it function for what I'm trying to do here. And if you're interested, you can see this video for more details of when I created a local Snapdrop server. So before I make any changes, I'm going to make a copy of the index.js file just in case I mess it up. I can always restore it. So I'm going to do copy server/index.js to server/index.js.org. And then I'm going to go and do sed-i, single quote, s/peer.ip/0/g, single quote, server/index.js. Do something similar, do in sed-i, tick, single quote, s/sender.ip/0/g, single quote, server/index.js. Okay, then that should be ready. Since we already created the Docker server snaps when we created the VM, Docker related commands should be ready to go. I can test this by typing docker, then hitting tab to see what commands start with Docker are available. And sure enough, we see Docker and Docker Compose. All right, now I'm ready to launch Docker, which includes the Snapdrop server. And I am going to be doing sudo docker-compose-f to read in the YAML file of /docker-compose.yaml. I'm going to use the up command to bring up the server, and then finally the -d option to make it a daemon so that it runs in the background so that we can get the command prompt back. All right, so once we hit enter, there's no problems, so we are looking good. Let me double check the IP of this VM by doing IP-BRA. All right, so here's our IP. And I'm going to switch over to my browser and go to the local host with the special port of 8082. After a second, we can see that we are connected to the Snapdrop server. As you can see, the note in the middle of the screen that says open Snapdrop on other devices to send files. If we look at the bottom of the screen, we see that this browser has the name of Pink Puma. The naming pattern of our Snapdrop server is some color like pink and followed by an animal like puma. Now I'm going to go to another machine on my network and launch a browser and then go to 192.168.1.170:8082. And pretty much immediately we see another machine pop up. It's the gold hookworm, which is from my second machine's browser. And to make sure things work, I will transfer a file over from my Windows machine to my Mac. And we see that Snapdrop on my VM works. Yay! So this is my first attempt of running Proxmox on my old MacBook Pro laptop. In this video, we installed Proxmox and then created a VM and then put a Snapdrop server on there. And that runs actually just fine. In future videos, I will be exploring creating Linux containers or LXCs and then loading up more VMs and LXCs. Subscribe to this channel for more videos on this topic and be sure to leave a comment below to let me know your thoughts. For more networking nugget videos, watch these videos here. Thanks for your time and happy hunting.